spend a little bit more time in the two files we were just working in when we were talking about errors, both the checked errors, the unchecked errors, and the logic errors. And I want to help you build what's called maintainable code. And that's to add comments through your code so that future programmers can understand what you were thinking in the code. So we're going to talk about a couple different comment types that go into it. And the first type of comment is probably the most standard, and that's a double slash, and in here you can put make an object of error check to use to call methods. And I went ahead and hit an enter and then added more slashes. You do have to add the slashes on every line, so I cannot just leave that there. Notice Eclipse is going to give me my checked error saying that doesn't exist. So for every line of code, you do need to add the slashes in front of that piece of it. So I can go ahead and define what's happening. If I go over to error check, I can put in top of here users age data or variable. Let's put variable slash attribute. You can put additional slashes back there if you want, but as long as the beginning of that line, and then everything on that line is then comment out. You can't put slashes in front of it. Sometimes you want to put slashes to comment out some code that you're not ready to test, so you can do that, but just know that anything on that line will not be executed when the Java runs. So, but what you can do is you can put slashes at the end here and say user's name variable slash attribute. And then what happens is the first part of the line will run as Java code, but then when it gets to the double slash, that becomes a comment. From a preference perspective, I like my comments above the names because it's easier to scan down the left-hand side and see them. But if you're trying to save space, these can go over to the right-hand side, and they can go as long as you want. Again, from a readability perspective, you do want to make it as usable. So maybe if you only had a couple set words here, like user's name, you could do something like that. And then maybe if you had something over here, you could do age must be greater than 0. Now that doesn't build any logic into it. That's just kind of from your perspective. You're telling the next person who reads the code that somewhere in here you're probably going to have some logic that makes sure that the age is greater than 0. The other type of comment that you might run into is you might see a slash with a star, and now I can put all kinds of content inside of here. So this is a long text box comment area where I am experimenting with different types of code and comments to show how to document, and I'll stop here, document code. And I've got a couple of comments there. Notice what happens there is it puts in all these little stars next to it. You can also comment out big blocks of code. So let's say I wanted to comment out this method. I could put at the beginning and at the end, and then this whole thing will not be compiled. So let's say you're trying a bunch of different methods and you're not ready to test them out. You can comment out codes. In Eclipse, they'll add the stars, but you don't really need the stars for that piece of it. The other thing from a comment perspective is I can highlight code and then either hit Command or Control, depending on what kind of computer you are, with the slash, and it will add the comments for all that code together. So, and then when to uncomment it, you can do Command and then hit that same piece that goes along with it. So I highlight code and then either Command or Control with the slash, it puts it in, and then if those same spots are highlighted, Command or Control and Select puts it back in. So from a comment perspective, you've got block comments. You've got block comments around pieces, you've got comments that go above it, and you've got comments that go below it. So mix and match your comments, and I would highly encourage you to get good at adding comments because at some point in these classes, you're going to have to read someone else's code. So you want them to put comments in there, so make the best use of it. The last thing I will add is that when you name your variables, you can self-comment by naming your variables appropriate things. So if I'm going to store age, I wouldn't call it public int color to store their age. And for their name, I wouldn't do public string breakfast if I'm going to store the person's first name. So by naming your variables correctly and your methods correctly, you can give some clue what's going on to it so the person that's reading it knows what you're trying to store or what you're trying to do inside the method. So understand comments and try to make sure that you add enough comments to get the pieces working correctly. And you'll find that your code is more maintainable. And when you get to assign someone else's code, it's more maintainable for you. Okay, that's it for comments.